Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. Are you looking for a way to make every single dungeon cooler, more unique? When you run your party through a dungeon, do you want it to be truly memorable and epic? More epic than ever? Well, in this video, I'm going to walk you through my one tip process. This one tip is going to blow your mind, and this is going to help you make every single dungeon cooler. And not only am I going to explain it in depth and how to use it, but I'm also going to supply you with an example, a download that you can use to get started on your next dungeon using this tip. So you're not going to want to miss this. Let's dive into it. Running dungeons is a D&D staple adventure. Dungeons are basically either man-made or natural underground constructs. Generally, you're surrounded by stone and you go through them room by room. They may branch off into different rooms, but generally speaking, the idea is there's some kind of loot or something at the end of the dungeon. The players are going after it. Protecting it is some kind of big bad villain. They're probably going to have to fight or something. So it's an all-encompassing adventure. They may encounter monsters or henchmen or traps or any number of hazards. And thus, there you have the dungeon concept. Hence the term dungeon crawling, hence Dungeons and Dragons. With that being said, how do you make every single dungeon more awesome? If you just throw some loot in an underground thing with some henchmen and monsters, and you create a bad, evil person guarding said loot, and you just throw players in there and you're just rolling combat and you're just sneaking from room to room and springing traps and the like, this is only going to be so interesting. How do you make your dungeons way more epic? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it in this video, and it all comes down to one basic rule. Make the dungeon its own story. Dungeons make an awesome narrative story delivery piece from GM to players. And as we all know, D&D is all about letting your players, empowering your players even, to create amazing narrative story arcs based on their characters. The characters are the centerpiece of the story, but a dungeon can be an amazing place for those stories to become more complex and to bring narrative pieces together to make it awesome and even more epic. And in order to explain to you exactly how to do this, I have a set of steps that I'm going to explain to you, and I have a downloadable example of these steps in motion. So if you go down in the description, you'll find a PDF called Dungeon Story Guide, the Necromancer's Animation Laboratory. This is going to contain notes about what I'm about to explain. Basically, what I'm about to explain to you is a dungeon that I have written out a story for. And I'm going to show you how the different parts of the dungeon can be almost like different chapters in a story, and how you make them fit together by focusing on the key story elements of the dungeon first and then working your way back from there. You can grab that and download it. If you think that this is at all a cool dungeon concept, you can grab that. It's free. It's just a PDF on my Google Drive, and you can use that either as fuel for inspiration, or you can grab some details from it for your next dungeon, or you can just use it to follow along with this video, because it's going to contain the information in written form, basically, that I'm going to give you here in the video. With that being said, let's dive into it and start with step number one. Create the central dungeon plot arc / story. Okay, so basically what we're going to do to start this process is we're going to link the rooms together in our dungeon to create an entire story with different rooms corresponding to different chapters in the story. We're going to insert clues for mystery. We're going to make sure that there's something new to discover in every single room to engage the adventure / exploration aspect of the session. And we're going to determine what is in those rooms and what constitutes those chapters by using a simple common sense delineation process of basically working outwards from our century storyline arc. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by this. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called My Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. So let's say that the dungeon that we're going to design is going to be a necromancer animation laboratory. And the actual storyline here is that there is this necromancer who is abducting bodies from local graveyards, maybe even people from local villages, bringing them to his laboratory and turning them into an undead army. Okay, he has a dungeon where he facilitates this. And this is simple. This is a 4-room dungeon. How would he set this up to make maximal use of his space and his resources to accomplish his mission? Well, his mission is to create as many undead as fast as possible and then to find a way to control them until the time comes to set them loose. So with this being said, we're going to focus on the deepest room of the dungeon first, which is the final room. This contains the laboratory / animation station. Okay, there's going to be a small portion of this final room that the necromancer also uses as their own personal living quarters. So we'll put some weird furnishings in there and some personal effects. So it's going to be kind of like he has like a makeshift apartment in one corner of it, but then mostly it is his laboratory station. No one else is really allowed in here other than key henchmen, and he uses this as a workspace to construct his monstrous undead atrocities. So now we've worked out the deepest part of the dungeon and kind of what form it serves, and then we're going to work our way back from there. So let's talk about room number 3 now. This is the second deepest room in the dungeon. Room number 3 contains a large steel reinforced cage where the undead are kept so that they won't roam away. As you probably know, necromancers generally cannot control all kinds of undead all at the same time. There's generally a limit, a cap to how many they can control. So in order to avoid succumbing to this cap and having his own undead possibly turning on his henchmen or on himself, this necromancer has built a steel reinforced cage to keep his spare undead penned up until the time comes to open the door and say, go, go spread mayhem. Unbeknownst to the party, this cage can be easily unlocked by a key henchman if an alarm is sounded, and it is a defensive maneuver. There is a large door separating room 3 from room 4, so the zombies will tend to funnel outward to leave the dungeon if the door is opened. This is bad news for anyone trying to enter because they will be met with a horde of undead creatures that they will have to fight their way through in order to get deeper. This helps the necromancer to make full use of the resources he has generated in order to protect himself and his laboratory from invasion. On another note, this room also functions as an armory for the henchmen. They have small bunks here. They stash weapons, armor, and gear in this room, and the necromancer likes this idea because he likes for his henchmen to always be on their toes. Sleeping in the same room with a horde of undead, basically waiting right behind steel bars to come and eat you for breakfast, is definitely unnerving. Henchmen who are not going to have the stomach for this job probably aren't going to last because they're going to get very sleep deprived here. They're not going to get any sleep. The serious ones, though, they're going to become accustomed to this, and so sleeping next to the undead will be no problem for them. Plus, this serves as an additional final line of defense should the laboratory be subject to some kind of outside incursion. The henchmen could take up weapons once the alarm is sounded and put up a line of defense in front of the deepest room of the laboratory, which, while that may not sound like a fun activity with undead also running around, the hazards that come with the job are why they make the coin they make. Let's work our way back now to room number 2. This is the third deepest room, the second room in the dungeon, and this is an underground spring is what I've decided to do here. So there's a body of water here that filters through the underground, and there's a pool. This is a source of fresh water. It serves as water for not only the group to drink, but also for the necromancer's work. Now, there's a steel reinforced cage around this body of water as well. Why is this, you might ask? Well, it is so that the undead don't wander into it, fall into it, and poison it. That would be very unfortunate. There's a checkpoint station in this room as well, where the henchmen examine incoming supplies and bodies. Here, they loot the bodies, stash found treasure in chests, lock those chests away in a sort of reinforced steel cage to prevent theft, undress the bodies, burn the soiled clothing, and trash any large kiln that vents smoke through engineered air ducts, leading to a magical filter that filters the smoke and turns the air into fresh, breathable oxygen. There's also an alarm system in this room that, when the lever is pulled, causes the magical alarm to sound. And so we have a couple things going on in here. Number one, there's loot being taken from the bodies coming in. This loot is reinvested by the necromancer and his henchmen to improve the equipment and the dungeon. This has to be kept behind lock and key, of course, because petty thievery could be an issue when you're dealing with the types who would be willing to be henchmen for a necromancer. In the first place, they're probably not the most law-abiding types, and so only trusted key-carrying henchmen have access to this loot. Hey, real quick, are you tired of rolling the same old dungeon loot using these same old methods time after time, game after game? Well, I have a solution for you. This is how I roll all of my dungeon loot now. It's a book I created called the Ultimate Dungeon Loot Randomizer. This book contains 10 massive D100 tables full of awesome dungeon loot. Roll on a table for mundane items, slightly magical dungeon items, mundane weapons and armor, magical weapons and armor, individual pieces of treasure, magic scrolls, potions and elixirs, cursed items, forgotten wonders and otherworldly relics, and even full chests of treasure and loot. This book is now available on my Blurb bookstore in 3 different versions. There's a hardcover option, a softcover option that's more affordable, and a super affordable digital ebook option. It's even system agnostic, meaning you can use it with any fantasy TTRPG system, and you can just adapt it to the rule set you're using. Link is in the description. Don't miss out. Grab it today. And now let's work our way out to the first room of the dungeon, room number 1, the guard room. Okay, this room contains the front entryway, which is always guarded by henchmen, and in my way of thinking, probably has large doors, perhaps steel reinforced doors locked, obstructing the entryway. I imagine there are guards outside of it and also guards on the inside. Then, right inside, there is a cart loading system where bodies can be loaded onto a cart on rails. These rails run all the way through the dungeon, all the way down to the laboratory. This makes it easier to haul dead bodies or supplies down to the laboratory for reanimation. But in every room, there's a fail-safe stop to halt the cart, and only by turning the key in these brake mechanisms can the cart be allowed to proceed. This keeps the cart from being wheeled through the dungeon without proper inspection. This also keeps the party from being able to jump in the cart and ride it all through the 4 rooms without slamming into a brake and potentially toppling the cart over, which is sort of like a trap if players fail to perceive well enough the braking system. There's also a series of traps in the hallway leading from room number 1 to room number 2. And in fact, there would be a code for this, which are the proper tiles or stones to step on, the way to walk through the tunnel without triggering the traps. It could almost be like a rite of passage, like a game. The henchmen leaders teach the new recruits this code once or twice, and then watch with, let's say, malevolent fascination as they perhaps take bets with one another about which newcomers will trigger traps and which ones won't. If a newcomer triggers a trap, guess what? They're just thrown in with the rest of the bodies and turned into undead minions. The necromancer doesn't see a problem here. Those who are smart enough, bright enough to learn the traps and navigate them, guess what? They have a long-term gig here, I guess. But players will have no knowledge of these traps, and in the heat of battle, they will have to either check for them or run the risk of running down the hallway themselves. The reason these traps exist here is not only to keep invasions from being able to just make their way inside, but it also helps to protect the necromancer from people who may try to disguise themselves as henchmen and walk down the hallway. Obviously, an untrained henchman would not know the proper code for walking and thus would be vulnerable to trap triggering. And thus we have a 4-room dungeon where every room kind of makes up its own chapter, but they do blend together in a pretty common sense manner. And this really helps make sense for immersion. And as I said before, determining the purpose of the dungeon first and working our way back from there can really help us to give it that immersive feel. There is another element of storytelling when it comes to dungeons, though, that I think is really important and often missed. And I think that this is actually a lot of fun. And this is to have inter-party drama coinciding with the dungeon. So here's what I might do if I have a group of adventurers about to go into this dungeon. Maybe there's an NPC with them. Maybe she's a cleric in training who's traveling with the party as a hireling. But about the time they're going to move into the dungeon for the first time, she decides at this point in time to open up to one of the other characters, player characters, and say, so I don't know if you know this about me, but being underground makes me super nervous. And this is just like a random thing she says, right? And then maybe the player character says, oh, it'll be fine. Maybe gives her a little, hint, like a little positive, uplifting, motivational speech. But then the break-in commences, and maybe they fight their way into the first room of the dungeon. And about the time they get it cleared, she decides to confide once again into this player character and says to them, okay, so do you remember when I told you that being underground makes me kind of nervous? To which this character would maybe reply, yeah, why? Why does it matter? She might say, well, there's something in my past I may have failed to mention. And then this player character might be like, okay, what? Now there's a little curiosity. They're like interested. And she would say, I was once, how can we say this? Pronounced as dead and left buried underground for a period of a week before being exhumed and reanimated by a wizard. At this point, the player character might care, they might not care. But the point is that this NPC is choosing to tell this story about her background. So sort of a little bit of inter-party drama that's going on alongside the dungeon. And every single chapter, she's choosing to tell more of it. And then the idea is it would get more dramatic and crazy as you move in, and maybe she would start to act erratic, or maybe being around the undead then would cause her to like maybe have a panic attack, or maybe she goes into a flying berserker rage, or maybe she finds herself here, or maybe she loses herself. Maybe she loses her mind, has a mental break. We don't know. We could make random rolls to find out. But the idea is, if you have NPC drama sort of corresponding with the chapters in the dungeon, then you can turn this into a story with many multifaceted, various different kind of complex factors going on in each chapter. And to me personally, that drama makes it even more fun. But running a dungeon is a fantastic way to break it up, because you have every room as a chapter, and then you have a new chapter of the drama every time they get into a new room. And so I get really good responses when I run this kind of thing in my own games. So shabam, that is my advice on that part. With that being said, I believe that concludes my advice on how to make every dungeon more awesome. These are all of my most popular, well-used, tried and tested tips for making every single dungeon as awesome as it can possibly be. Obviously, there are maps, there's the loot, there's everything. But when it all comes down to it, when it's all said and done, what really makes a dungeon fun is the drama and really the exploration and the mystery and getting that storyline to coincide with the action and the stuff. If you can pull that off, you're going to make your dungeons awesome, and your players are going to love them, and your dungeons are probably going to be their favorites. So there you go. That's all I have to say on this one. Hey, thank you for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every day creating videos about the best game in the world. I will see you awesome people on the next one.